Hey, runners. Welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel Run Recover podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchuk, sport dietitian, certified running coach, and personal trainer. We are currently wrapped up on season 3 of the show. Thank you so much for another wonderful season. And not to worry, we will be back for season 4 in early 2026. Until then, I'm so excited to share these re-releases of the top 10 episodes from this past season. So each week we'll be dropping a new re-release from season 3 that hopefully you can catch or give another listen to. If you already heard it once, maybe you'll pick up some new gems this time around. Some of these re-release episodes are fan favorites. So these are the episodes that had the most listens and downloads from you guys, my lovely listeners and subscribers. But some of them are also my personal favorites that I just wanted to reshare. Some of the ones that if you missed the first time around, I really hope you'll tune in and give them a listen this time. I hope in these episodes you're going to find some new gems, maybe some new aha moments when it comes to your nutrition, your training, your recovery, your relationship with food and exercise, or maybe just a little bit of extra motivation to keep you running strong until we're back in 2026. And of course, if you haven't downloaded my new free resource, which is my free fueling audit for runners, definitely head over to the link in the show notes and be sure to get your copy ASAP. This is just a quick checklist that will walk you through the most common signs and symptoms of underfueling in runners and help you identify where the gaps are with your eating habits and where poor nutrition might be holding you back from reaching your full health and performance potential. So once again, head over to the link in the show notes. Definitely grab your free fueling audit. And of course, let me know your score once you're done. All right, let's dive into this week's replay. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel Run Recover podcast, where I am very excited to be chatting with you today about a topic that, comes up a lot in the world of running nutrition, which is about fueling workouts, fueling shorter, quote unquote, shorter races, and just the differences in perspective that we can see around this topic. And, I just this week that I'm recording this episode, there's been a lot of conversation online about the use of gels for half marathon distance. Now, if you spend any time on Instagram or on Threads, you might know what I'm referring to. By the time this episode comes out, this will be a distant memory in the world of social media, but it sparked a ton of conversation, and not new conversation by any stretch. I mean, these are things that have been being discussed in online spaces for like years and years and years around fueling workouts, fueling races. How do we do it? Should we do it? When do we do it? And so today I want to bring you my thoughts on this topic, and hopefully maybe this will be a little bit of a hot takes or, unpopular opinion episode. I'm not sure. But I wanted to sort of break it down, give my perspective, and also give some reasons why a person may choose to fuel shorter races, workouts during the week, etc. But then also, what are some of the benefits of like not maxing out your fueling for every single work? And I want to talk about that too, because I do think there is a lot of really valid stuff to be discussed and kind of understood. I think for a lot of people, the assumption, because as a running dietitian, we do spend a ton of time online talking about optimal fueling, eat more carbs, take in more gels, whatever it might be, really encouraging and promoting more fuel. And I think the perspective is that, dietitians maybe don't understand the alternative perspective. And sometimes there's a little bit of like respect lost from people who do see that other viewpoint and do understand some of the physiology of, training with glycogen depletion. And so I want to just talk about that too, just so everybody kind of understands like the full circle of what's going on here. It's definitely a hot topic. It's something that's always coming up in conversation. Somebody will say something, it blows up online, goes viral. Everyone's got a take. Everyone's kind of got an opinion on it. And what I see is that these conversations and these back and forths that we can wind up having and see happening online comes down to a fundamental difference in perspective and a fundamental difference in opinion when it comes to running in general. And I'll say sort of like running nutrition in general. And neither viewpoint, neither perspective is right or wrong. These are both perfectly valid. They're just slightly different world views that a person might have, a slightly different viewpoint on running. And when we can kind of think about it that way and almost zoom out a little bit and understand that there's just like a fundamental difference in the way that people see this sport and in the way that people approach this sport, I think we can all come to a little bit of a more mutual understanding and maybe approach some of these conversations with a little bit less judgment, a little bit less argumentative, or sort of piling on that we can see from both sides, from both perspectives. And maybe just sort of see that, at the end of the day, people want different things out of running and people have different goals with any athletic endeavor, sport, performance, etc. And so the first, kind of the one side of this. Now, I also want to say that I am not a sports psychologist. So my sort of, armchair analysis is just the observations that I see from like reading people's questions and comments online, conversations, content, right? The conversations that I have with runners as a coach and dietitian every single day, the books that I read by coaches versus by dietitians. And again, just kind of a little bit of a different perspective and a different worldview on this stuff. On the one sort of side, and again, I don't want to necessarily have this be like this side versus that side, because I do not believe that either option in this case is right or wrong. I think they're both valid. They're just different, and we need to appreciate that. So we have people who really see like running and racing and like any of these athletic endeavors as the purpose and the point is the grind, right? The feeling of absolute complete exhaustion at the end of a hard effort, at the end of a race, doing something that gets you feeling like you're on the brink of death makes some people feel alive, right? And so they really love to push themselves to the absolute max physically and mentally, and they want to see what they're capable of with less. So for them to be taking something in a workout or in a race that they don't need doesn't make any sense, right? Because for them, part of the goal is to like see what they can do without all this extra stuff. So, without having a bunch of gels or any fuel, right? We say gels, but I mean, when I say gel, I mean any intra-workout fuel you're going to have. I never mean like specifically a gel as opposed to something else. To take fuel, if it's not an absolute requirement for survival, or to have hydration or electrolytes, if it's not an absolute requirement to complete this task, is silly, right? It doesn't make any sense. And so the fact that fueling or hydration could make an athletic endeavor easier is not appealing, because if they don't need it, like the point, it's not supposed to be easy, right? We're not here because we want it to be easy. We're here because we want to do the hard thing for the love of doing hard things and the sake of them being hard. And, really being able to dig deep physically and mentally into these sports and into these athletic endeavors is part of what some individuals love about it. So when we come and we say, well, but don't you know that if you were to drink more water, or if you were to take electrolytes, or if you were to fuel with 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour, this could feel so much easier, so much better. Well, they don't like that's not part of the draw. Like, we're not here for it to be easy. We're here because it's supposed to be hard, right? This is about the grind. And so these are the individuals that we see really kind of scoffing at the runners who are fueling and hydrating for short runs, who are bringing gels when they're going out for an hour long easy run. They're fueling 10Ks, they're fueling half marathons, they're running with their hydration vests when they're going out for half an hour, right? Like, for them, the purpose of doing these things and the purpose of the sport is just different. And again, super valid, right? But if we can kind of understand that perspective, that worldview, then it makes it really easy to understand why certain individuals have that thought or have those opinions, because they're not coming at it from, well, I want this to feel better, feel easier, etc. They want to see what they are capable of and sort of see what they can do kind of like on their own. So then on the other hand, right, we have the other perspective, which is that running or kind of any athletic endeavor like this can be enjoyable and really should be enjoyable, right? So rather than it being this sort of, almost soul crushing experience and the payoff is that you've survived to tell the tale about it, it's like it's feeling good while running, it's having fun while running, it's enjoying the experience and like having that be the draw. It's not necessarily the digging as deep as you possibly can mentally and physically and just that grind and that punishment that you're putting yourself through in order to cross the finish line. It's that like every step of this journey should be a really positive thing. And so then anything that we can use to optimize performance, right? Whether it's fuel, hydration, wearing a vest, having, say, your carbon plated shoes or whatever other tech or gear you might have, like anything that we can use here to enhance and optimize that performance. And that enjoyment of the experience is seen as worthwhile, right? Even if it's not necessary. This isn't about just making it through with the things that are absolutely necessary for survival. It's about having the whole the experience being enhanced and the whole thing being a really, fun and positive thing. And so when I see this, I think that, there are a lot of people who fall into both sort of camps and sort of both opinions. I do, however, think that there are some people who get maybe they fall into that first category because they feel as though that's the way that it has to be, that's the way that it should be, not necessarily because they share that viewpoint or even are aware that that's the viewpoint that they've been sort of taking. And then running does suck for them, but they're not doing that intentionally, right? Like they're not putting themselves through these workouts or through these races without fuel, without hydration, et cetera, because they necessarily are driven towards that being part of the experience or that being the purpose of the experience. They are there and they're in that camp because they've not really been shown that there's maybe another way. And again, I don't want to invalidate either option here, because I do think that they're both valid options. They're just different worldviews. But I do think that there are some people who might stick with running a lot longer and actually enjoy exercise and be more consistent with exercise more if they did fuel and hydrate themselves a little bit better and didn't let running fall into this sort of category of it being punishment. I think if you are approaching it with the intention and with you kind of your eyes wide open that this is the way that you see things and this is part of what makes you tick, then that's fantastic, right? Because your motivation and your why and your drive and your purpose is very clear to you. But if you don't necessarily share that worldview and you are finding yourself in that camp, then I do want you to know that there is another way to do things. It doesn't have to be option A. So I really hope that I haven't, offended any listeners with what I've shared here. And if you think that I'm speaking to you and I've read you completely wrong, my apologies. But this is just what I gather from all the things that I see online. Maybe I have completely hit the nail on the head with you and you're like, yeah, Steph, you read me, you got me, which is great. I just want you to know that everyone is welcome here. The only thing that I don't want to have come out of any content that I put out or anything like that is for there to be kind of more negativity, more arguing, more misunderstanding, and, kind of more shit flinging across the fence at each other when really we're just sitting here just seeing the world and seeing the sport of running and exercise differently, right? Both of these perspectives are perfectly valid. And maybe you fall somewhere on a spectrum here. Like maybe it isn't an A or B sort of a dichotomous thing. Maybe it is that you can be sort of somewhere in between the two. And that again is also perfectly valid. These things are just going to be part of our personalities, part of who we are, part of our fundamental belief systems and how we see the world. And no one can or should discourage you from having your own viewpoint on this. But what I also want to share today is that, sort of breaking down why, if you are curious about fueling, curious about why myself as a running coach and dietitian would support more fueling for workouts and races, and no, it's not because I'm being paid by Big Gel or anything like that. Why I might support more fueling. I'm gonna share some reasons there with you. And again, this isn't a who's right, who's wrong. And it also is not even a dichotomous thing of like faster runners versus slower runners, because I definitely see these differences of opinion in runners of all speeds and all levels, right? There are plenty of runners who are quite fast and they do not fuel or hydrate in a way that, like, technically speaking, would be considered kind of optimal from like a um, sport nutrition science sort of perspective, right? Based on what the research tells us about grams of carbs per hour, optimizing fueling, etc. Lots of people can do amazing things not hitting those targets, right? Not taking in that kind of fuel. There are also a lot of, what we would call slower runners, right? Back of the pack runners who, even with optimal fueling and hydration, and who take their fueling and hydration very seriously, are not necessarily going to see these breakneck speeds just from doing that, right? And everything in between, you see people who fuel and hydrate very well and are very fast, and people who don't and who aren't, right? It's all over the map. So, why might I, as a running coach and dietitian, support fueling for workouts and races, even in situations where technically, yes, a person could complete the workout or the race without fuel, right? Like, obviously, no one can argue that you can run a half marathon, or yes, even a full marathon, without taking in intra run fuel. Yes, you can do your workouts fasted, and you can complete even very challenging workouts without eating anything before. Like, people do it every single day. So I would never sit here and say, well, you can't, or you shouldn't, or whatever, because obviously I would be proven wrong time and time again from many, many people who do these things. But again, if you are curious about why maybe fueling could help you, what are the benefits of fueling a little bit more consistently before and during runs, why might we want to explore that? Here are some reasons why that might be worth exploring and worth looking into if you're curious. The first big one is that, of course, our golden rule of running is nothing new on race day. And so if you are running a marathon, and most people would agree, that I've seen anyway, most people agree that a marathon requires intra-run fueling. Now, I do see a small subset of people who would disagree with that statement. They have run marathons, fasted. Again, not the fastest marathon times we can see, but yes, they have completed the marathon distance without taking in fuel during that race. And again, they might sit in sort of the perspective of like, well, I can complete it without, so why would I take in something? Maybe it would enhance my performance, make me faster, but I don't necessarily want that. I want to do it without. And again, perfectly valid. But the golden rule is nothing new on race day. And so I see a lot of people who will say, well, you have to fuel for a marathon, right? Or you should fuel for a marathon. And so at some point during the training process, right, if we're typically training fasted, typically not taking in anything, there's going to come a point where now the marathon is here, right? It is the day of the race. And if you've spent your entire training cycle not practicing eating or even drinking during your runs, now you've reached a point where you are probably going to run into a lot of problems, GI speaking, right? Whether it's getting cramps, extra bathroom trips, maybe not even being able to complete your race because you have not practiced eating and drinking while you're running a marathon. So the golden rule is nothing new on race day. And so part of what we want to do here is we want to practice exactly what we are going to do on the day of the race. Now, if you're a very seasoned runner, if you've been running for possibly decades, and your gut is very well trained, like you do plenty of runs and races and have for many, many years with fuel, And now during this specific training cycle, you are going to do intentionally more fasted training for the purpose of, possibly increasing your ability to store muscle glycogen, which we're going to talk about in a minute. We're going to get there. But if you are intentionally going to do this as part of your approach to training, as part of improving your performance in the long run, then I would have less concerns about that because your gut has been trained, right? Over many, many years, you've done the fueling, you've done the hydrating, you know how to eat and drink while you run, etc. So if you intentionally don't do that for a time, but then you're going to use your fuel, whether it's gels or something else or whatever, you're going to use that stuff on the day of the race, things you've practiced with before, things you've raced with before, amounts you've done in races before, like a short break of not having that stuff in an otherwise very well trained gut, it's not going to be a huge problem, right? But if you're someone who this is like, you're fairly new to running, this is your first couple of races, maybe your first couple of marathons, you historically have not trained your gut, you have not taken gels or other fuel or hydrated, etc., during your run, during your training runs, then to all of a sudden do that just on the day of the race, definitely not a good idea. So because of this nothing new on race day rule, we want to make sure that we have spent time, and this is like weeks, months. Like this is not something that we just do like one time before a race and then hope for the best. This is consistency, right? Training your gut. And so this is going to be a really big piece of answering that question around why should we fuel? Why do I recommend fueling? And of course, that leads into my second point, which is that we need to train our gut just like we train our muscles and our cardiovascular system for marathon running. And yes, half marathon running as well, right? And as I said, this takes time, weeks to months, to increase our tolerance and our ability to eat and drink during runs. On that same note, we also need to find what works for us. And I mean, like, are we going to take gels? Are we going to use a sports drink? Are we going to take the little energy chews? Are we going to use waffles? Are we going to use dates? Are we going to use candy? Are we going to use, dried fruit, the fruit sticks? I'm not saying the right thing, like the fruit bars, like the fruit leather, like, are we going to use something like that? Like, just determining what package, what type of fuel do we want to use? And there's no one size fits all here. There is literally endless combinations of fuel, fluids, and electrolytes that we can take in to support our running. So it's going to take some time to find what works for us. And if we only take in fluid and fuel when it is absolutely required for survival, like needed for completing that run, we aren't going to have that many opportunities for both gut training or finding what we like and what works for us. Now, again, if you are a very, very seasoned runner, you've been running for years and years and years, done many, many training cycles, you might already have an idea, or probably have an idea of what does work for you. And so because of that, this whole conversation around figuring out what you like, practicing with different things, training your gut, etc., just doesn't really apply to you because you've done that already. You're past that point. So you may be now in a different sort of season or different phase where your focus is elsewhere. But you have that knowledge and you have that plan that you are going to follow and use on race day because you've already done that work previously. So we have to find out what works for us, take the time to train our gut, just like we would train our muscles, train our cardiovascular system, everything else. The body just needs time to adjust to being able to take in that food and fluid during the run. We also know, point blank, without question, this is like decades and decades and decades of research across many different sports, especially endurance sports. We know that carbohydrates improve performance, right? And yes, there are individuals who feel differently about it. And oftentimes, this is a matter of they aren't necessarily fueling adequately or properly. So, like, if you're, say, taking in 15 grams of carbs an hour over the course of a marathon, like, it's such a tiny amount when our recommendation is closer to 90 grams of carbs per hour for optimal performance, that, like, if you took one gel over like a 4 or 5 hour marathon, I wouldn't expect you to feel a difference. So if it gives you GI issues and you end up slowing down because you've gut issues because you're trying to take these gels, but you haven't trained with them, your gut's not trained or whatever, then you have maybe didn't have a good experience with carbohydrates in performance. But overall, like the overarching kind of research, again, across many sports, everything really does show that carbohydrates improve performance. And the more carbohydrate we take in, the better performance outcomes we see. So training in a fasted or, glycogen depleted state, right, where you have very little muscle glycogen left, if you're training like that all the time and racing like that all the time, like it's just going to impair your performance and not allow you to hit the paces or the distances that you might want to. Now, again, I understand that for some people, optimal performance isn't necessarily the point, like with the use of extra things like gels or other additional carbohydrates or sports drinks, etc. Right? But if you're someone who really wants to use these tools that you have available to your advantage in order to optimize performance, then this is a great kind of case for doing so. And, too, like if you're always hitting the wall on your long runs, like if you are not able to complete the distances on your long runs, if you're stopping short, if you're running for a while and then the last few miles you're having to just slow right down to a walking pace because your energy levels just totally hit the wall as you go, you're doing yourself a big disservice when it comes to getting the training benefits, right? If you cannot complete the distances or hit the paces that you are needing to in this as part of your training cycle because you are underfueled, because you are so glycogen depleted, then that's only going to just do you a disservice from a fitness level and from a performance level in the long run. So sometimes it's not just about like completing a workout or completing a race, but like really crushing them and really doing the best that you possibly can and getting over that threshold of seeing those performance improvements. We also know that fueling with carbohydrates spares muscle tissue from being broken down to create more glucose. So we, of course, have body fat, and body fat is used as an energy source during exercise, as well as at rest, right? The lower the intensity of the exercise, the more reliance on fat we use as a fuel source. So when you're doing that aerobic training, right, when you're doing those easy runs, the ones that we, tell you all the time, you got to do the easy running, build that aerobic base. Part of the adaptation, part of the benefits of doing that aerobic base building type of training is that you teach your body to get more efficient and better at using fat as a fuel source for running, which is great, right? Because we essentially, as human beings, have endless body fat, right? Even someone who's very lean has very little body fat percentage, technically has almost endless body fat stores that they can break down and pull from in order to run, right? In order to do that low intensity exercise. But that we never ever have completely shut off our requirement for carbohydrates, right? So it's not over here we're 100% burning fat and over here we're 100% burning carb, right? There's a greater reliance on one or the other, but it's never an all or nothing thing. Now, if we're trying to perform better, which essentially means running faster, a higher intensity, that increases our reliance on carbohydrate. So what can happen is if we are consistently trying to run, workouts, long runs, where we are demanding more carbohydrate than our body has, yes, part of the adaptation that occurs is that we get better at storing muscle glycogen. So our body increases its capacity to store muscle glycogen. But what can also happen is that we are going to be breaking down muscle tissue to create glucose to fuel the performance that we're doing right now. So it's a little bit of a give and take. It's a little bit of a balancing act. Now, from my perspective, right, I basically never want someone sacrificing muscle tissue, right? And knowing that doing a long run just in and of itself, we are going to deplete our muscle glycogen that we have pretty significantly just from doing the long run. We don't necessarily need to also do that long run fasted or also do all of our workouts during the week fasted and just be sort of carbohydrate depleted all the time in order to try and push that specific adaptation, especially if it may over time have negative impacts on our strength, body composition. Of course, we're talking about increasing muscle glycogen storage. Well, if we have less muscle to store the glycogen in, then of course we're going to see less glycogen storage over time, not more. So I think there definitely is a case to be made for, fueling our workouts more effectively, right? More fueling during those workouts, as well as taking steps to make sure that we aren't losing muscle mass just from doing all of this, all of this high training volume or all of this really heavy training in a depleted state. So, underfueling can definitely be a problem. And if we're doing a lot of very long runs and like we're spending hours and hours training, then it also may take away from our ability to take in the calories that we need for the day. And so this is something we want to be really careful of, is like if we are not consuming any fuel before the workout and then we're not consuming any fuel during the workout, we now have, several hours less out of the day in which to get in the total calories that we need met. And so this can be for a very high volume runner, people who are doing a lot of training or maybe even double workout days. Certainly people who are doing double workout days, is that we also run the risk of just not being able to hit our general like calorie, protein, carbohydrate goals for the day if there are so many hours of the day that we aren't allowing ourselves to take in any fuel. So the next reason why we, may want to take in fuel and fluids for workouts and, these quote unquote shorter race distances, meaning like less than a marathon, is that we need practice, right? Like logistically, not just training our gut, like physically putting the food in and putting the fluid in and like training our digestive system, but also just the logistics, right? We need to practice running with fluids. We need to practice taking fuel during a run. Maybe you try out taking a gel and you make a big sticky mess everywhere and you're like, I am never doing that ever again. I would much rather have, say, like gummy candies that I could just grab one, put it in my mouth and just eat it. Maybe I'd rather use dried fruit. Maybe I would rather fuel with pretzels, right? Because I want to get the salt and I don't really like sweet things. I have a hard time with that. Whatever it might be, you need to practice not just the actual gut training, but also the logistics, right? Rehearsing and getting used to that part. How are you going to package these things, right? Do you have a pocket that you can put them in? I'm speaking more so for, female runners who are wearing running clothing made for females, where you may or may not have any pockets on any of your gear, depending on, what you buy. But thinking about those things, right? If I'm going to take in these gels, where am I going to put them, right? If I'm using this hydration vest, wearing a hydration pack, am I ready to wear that for 13 miles or 26 miles? If I'm not used to it, it's going to feel cumbersome. It's going to feel heavy. It's going to feel like just so awful if I've never worn it before. So having, rehearsing and practicing with these things, even on shorter runs, just gets us used to the gear, used to the logistics, used to have, being able to like run and while reaching in our pocket. I know some people like to stop and walk while they take their fuel, walk while they get their things out of their pockets. But if you don't want that to be you, right? If you do want to run while you're doing these things, you need to practice doing that. For me, I run holding a water bottle all the time. I always have, because I always ran with water. And so for some people, that is craziness. To run with a water bottle in your hand, like how cumbersome, how awful, how distracting, how terrible. But because I've always done it, it doesn't feel weird, right? It just feels like second nature to run with a water bottle in my hand. Now, I don't like running with my phone in my hand. That's a totally different story, but a water bottle I can do. So I like my hydration pack as well. But just in the last couple of years, pregnancy and having young kids, I haven't been doing that much in terms of mileage. So just running with a water bottle has been totally fine. But yeah, like if we're only saving this stuff for those biggest, longest 3-hour runs that we're going to do as part of a marathon training cycle, oh, and we're going to be out for 2 hours if we're training for a half marathon, for example, like you don't have that many of those runs during a training cycle, right? There's not that many opportunities or that many chances to practice with this stuff. So if you're a newer runner and this is your first couple of races, like you don't want to try something twice. Neither went great. And now the race is here and you don't really know what you're going to do, right? You're feeling even more stressed out, even more confused, even more anxious because you don't have a consistent, solid plan in place. Feeling confident in your gear, in your fueling plan, in your hydration plan, like knowing exactly what you're going to do and feeling good about it is so important. I can't stress that enough. If you're listening to this as someone who's a very, very experienced runner and you've done the training, the gut training, you know what works for you for fueling and hydration. You've ran with your hydration vest many, many, many times. Like if you've got all that stuff down pat, and now you're specifically aiming for a different strategy and kind of a different approach with what you're doing with your workouts, then of course, you're gonna be have my full blessing to do whatever you want in that regard. But if you're newer, then having more practice is certainly better than having less. All right. So this takes me to the final thing that I wanted to kind of talk about today here, which is what are the benefits of running in a glycogen depleted state? Because like I said, this is not without potential benefit. This is not something that is like all bad all the time, always a problem. And I don't want to give the perception that it is. I think there are certainly more valid reasons to fuel from a performance perspective versus not. But I also don't want to completely disregard that there are physiological changes and adaptations that take place when we do deplete our muscle glycogen stores. So I am not saying that runners should just be like nonstop eating carbohydrates all the time, no matter what, rest or no rest, doesn't matter, hundreds and hundreds of grams of carbs per hour all the time, all day, because like there are some benefits to depleting or at least partially depleting our muscle glycogen. So the first, of course, as I mentioned, is that with training, right, when we're doing that lower intensity training, we tell the body to get better at using fat as a fuel source. And this is huge, right? Because that means that we are going to have less reliance on glycogen when we're running. So we can then run for longer, faster, without using as much muscle glycogen that we have stored, which then means that we have more gas in the tank to go farther for longer. Now, this is taking place just simply by doing the training. It's not necessarily hinged on having to do fasted running. But when we deplete our muscle glycogen stores over the course of that long run, we are going to increase our body's capacity for storing glycogen, right? When the brain senses that our muscles are running low on glycogen, the next time around, it's gonna say, our brain doesn't say, but you know what I mean. It's gonna say, well, you know what? We ran out of gas last time, or got close to running out of gas. Like we're never gonna 100% completely deplete our glycogen stores, but we got pretty close to running out of gas the last time. So you know what we should do? We should make sure that for next time we can bring more gas. So we increase our capacity for storing glycogen. And then of course the benefit there is that we are simultaneously using less glycogen, and the brain sensing that we have more glycogen available delays fatigue. So part of what causes us to fatigue during a race is that the brain is always keeping a close eye and monitoring how much muscle glycogen we have. And if it senses that glycogen depletion is occurring rapidly, right, or we're getting low, it's going to cause us to pull back, right? We're going to feel that fatigue sooner. But if we have more muscle glycogen, longer and into the race, we're going to delay that fatigue. And then physiologically speaking, we're burning more fat. And so we're using that glycogen more slowly. So that's part of like the beauty of training, right? And the beauty of doing these workouts is that we're not just training our muscles to be able to go longer, get stronger. Like we're not, and our cardiovascular endurance, we're not just training our heart to be stronger and do more. We're actually just, our whole system is getting better at helping us run faster for longer, which is really, really cool. But I want to be really clear that we don't need to train entirely fasted or fasted all the time to still get these benefits, right? Because just simply doing a long run, say longer than 90 minutes, is pretty much guaranteed to result in a glycogen depleted state almost regardless, right? And the reason is because you are not starting all of these workouts that you do completely maxed out on muscle glycogen stores, right? We know this because we know that we need to carb load for several days in order to max out our muscle glycogen. And carb loading means you're taking in somewhere between 8 and 12 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of your body weight per day for several days to max out muscle glycogen stores. And you're not doing that all the time consistently before you do your long runs, right? You're probably working, like doing a training run the day before your long run. And then you're going to obviously eat your regular meals and snacks. Maybe you're going to have an evening snack with a little bit of extra carb, but probably not even 100 extra grams of carbs. And then you're going to have your pre-workout fuel in the morning. You're going to go out for your long run. You are not starting that run with maxed out muscle glycogen stores. So therefore, over the course of that long run, if it's longer than 90 minutes, you are going to wind up in a glycogen depleted state. And so that in and of itself is going to prompt that adaptation to happen without you having to do anything special or, anything specific, and taking in that fuel from the purpose and perspective of training your gut, ensuring that you can complete the distance and maybe even do like a workout as part of that long run if it's required, or for those harder workouts. The benefits are going to outweigh the downside. Now, again, if you have been running for many, many years, you're very well trained, in most aspects, and you want to specifically and purposefully increase your muscle glycogen stores. Like your goal for this training cycle is to work on increasing your muscle glycogen stores. We don't have a way of like testing that and sort of knowing that really. But if that's your purpose and you want to do a little bit more running with less fuel to specifically and purposefully get that adaptation, again, that is one approach that you can take to your training and one thing that you can work on. But for most individuals, most newer runners or most less trained runners, there's so much benefit and so much improvement that we can see just from doing that training. And we need to build up the physical fitness, the cardiovascular fitness, the muscular endurance first by doing the training and fueling ourselves to be able to do the training, rather than it being a matter of, okay, now I'm going to start, playing around with the fueling to optimize my muscle glycogen and get in more muscle glycogen when I haven't taken those first steps. I haven't done first things first and focused on optimal fueling for optimal quality training so that I can see the maximum benefits from that first, then maybe shift gears to looking at changing around my fueling strategy as a next option. So I really hope that kind of puts everything in perspective for today. Again, I hope that if some of what I shared resonated with you, it was in a good way, not a bad way. I don't want to, offend anyone or make anybody feel like I don't understand or share, or sort of see differences in perspective and things like that. But if you are wondering why some people have differences of opinions or why some people have different perspectives, then I certainly, hope that today's podcast episode kind of gave you a little bit of insight as to why I really do see value in fueling, even for some of those quote unquote shorter distances where maybe fueling is not an absolute requirement for survival or 100% necessary, but still can really help us in the long run. Yeah. So I want to thank you for tuning into today's episode. I hope that you found it helpful. And of course, if you are a runner who is looking for a running training plan, looking for a coach, looking for a dietitian who can help you with your fueling plan, with your training plan, just, really putting all of these pieces together to give you your best shot at improving your performance, to really help you see those better race times, those better quality workouts, help running feel really good, then I would love to help you. And so, of course, you can find out more about how we can work together. I have both one-on-one coaching programs for running and nutrition, as well as a fantastic online program for runners called the Fuel Train Recover Club. And you can find details about all of that in the links in the show notes. That is it for today's episode. I want to thank you again for tuning in today. I really hope that you found it helpful, and I would love to continue this conversation with you over on Instagram. You can find me there at Steph the Runner's Dietitian. All right, that is it. Bye for now. We'll see you next week. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.